I'm Rona Walensky, Director of Mindfulness Programs at PassageWorks Institute, and one of your hosts for the Mindful Education Summit 2019, which is brought to you by the Awake Network and Mindful. And today, on this first day of the summit, our guest is Patricia Jennings, Professor of Education and Director of the Contemplative Teaching and Learning Lab at the Curry School of Education and Human Development at the University of Virginia. And we're delighted to have you with us, Tish.
Thank you, Rona. It's great to be with you.
So just for the audience to know, Tish and I know each other going way back to, I think, something like 2006 or 7. And Tish has been a leader in the mindfulness in education movement and a major researcher. And today we're going to be getting some of the results of her research and what she's got coming up next, as well as some of the lessons she's learned from that and some tips that members of the audience can use. So, Tish, one of the biggest studies you've done was a study of the CARE program, Cultivating Awareness and Resilience in Educators, in New York City. Can you tell us about that research project and the results that you've gleaned, which are quite interesting?
Sure. So this was a very large, I guess probably the largest of its kind, randomized trial. And the way we set this up was we recruited 224 elementary teachers from 36 schools in New York City, primarily in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. And we randomly assigned the teachers within the schools to receive the CARE program as part of their professional learning activities for that school year, or just engage in their typical professional learning activities that they normally would. Before we did that, we collected data from these teachers. We had them complete self-report measures. We observed their classrooms and coded them. These were researchers that didn't know anything about the study. They were just there to observe the classrooms and code them to see how the interactions in the classroom were going. And then we also had the teachers report on all of their students' complete questionnaires. So we had data from 5,200 students at the end of this whole project. So we collected the data, we randomly assigned them to these conditions. We delivered the CARE program to the CARE group, and then we did the same measurement protocol after the CARE program was over to see if there were any differences between these two classrooms after we intervened with this program. And it was really exciting because we replicated results with teachers that we expected. So for example, we reduced their psychological distress, which was great. We also reduced something called time urgency. Rona, as a principal, I'm sure you never ever felt any time urgency. It's kind of the ubiquitous stressor as a teacher and as an educator. You never feel like you have enough time. And a lot of times the rumination around not having time actually interferes with your ability to get things done that you need to do. So we saw a reduction in that. We also showed an improvement in mindfulness and emotion regulation. So we're really excited about that. But the thing that was really new and exciting was that we showed improvements in their classroom interactions. So we used a measure called the CLASS that looks at dimensions of classroom interactions. And the place where we were targeting was the emotional supportiveness of the classroom. That's where we thought we would find impacts, which we did. And under emotional supportiveness, there were two dimensions that we found significant improvement. One was teacher sensitivity, which didn't surprise me. So the teachers were showing signs of being more sensitive to the needs of their students. And also the overall emotional climate of the classroom was more positive. Now, another domain of this measure is classroom organization, which is basically classroom management. We thought maybe we would have impacts on this. There was only one dimension that did show impacts, and that was productivity. So the classrooms were more positive and the students were behaving in more productive ways. So that was exciting because it's the first time an intervention, mindfulness-based intervention, showed improvements in an environment, right? The thing that was, again, exciting, which hasn't been published yet, but we're working on the paper right now, is that when we looked at the teacher report data on these kids, the students were more engaged. All of them, all 5,200 students, or actually half of the 5,200 were more engaged than the other half, which was exciting. We didn't really know that we would have a direct impact on kids, because one of the reasons we chose these neighborhoods that we did was that we felt like the kids who need this the most, need a teacher who's more mindful, basically, are kids who are at most risk, right? Because a kid who's doing okay in life, whether their teacher is more mindful or not, you might not see major changes in them. So when we looked at just the kids in this sample who were low in social skills, which would be considered at most risk, we showed improvements in motivation and reading competence, which I found really exciting. And what I think is going on here is that when kids feel more safe, especially kids who have emotional and social difficulties, the more they're able to engage in content that requires a lot of focus, which reading does, obviously. So the other thing we found, which surprised me actually, was that the teachers who were low on mindfulness at baseline, that measured low, their kids improved as well. I can't remember right now which things they improved in, but the teachers who were low in mindfulness, who improved in mindfulness, their kids improved too, overall. So we're seeing that risk factors like student social emotional skills, or teacher mindlessness, I guess you could call it that, were most impacted by this program.
So I think it would help the audience to know, what is CARE? What does CARE do? What does it look like? How do you get some of it?
Well, to get it, first of all, CARE was developed when I worked at the Garrison Institute, and it belongs to the Garrison Institute, but it's licensed to a new nonprofit called Create for Education. And if you Google Create for Education, you'll find where the trainings are being offered and how to get involved. The program combines three actually really critical elements. One is emotion skills, like learning about your emotions. Why is a classroom stressful? Why are student behaviors difficult to manage sometimes? And how can I recognize when I'm starting to feel stress? And how can I learn to calm myself down so that I don't overreact? Because from my years of experience observing teachers as a teacher educator, it was one of the things I found most interfered with performance for teachers, was this sort of difficulty regulating emotions in this difficult context. It's a really challenging context. So it's not surprising that educators, we find it difficult to regulate in the context of a classroom. The other part of it is a variety of mindful awareness practices, and the intention of these practices to help teachers learn a self-care strategy so they can build the resilience that will allow them to notice how they're feeling in the moment when these feelings arise, and also build the resilience to bring themselves back down or calm themselves when they needed to calm down. And also to be more aware of the interactions that are going on between them and their students, which I think is reflected in that teacher sensitivity that I just mentioned. And the other part of this is compassion practices, building that, and that's rooted in the teacher's own values and ethics. So we have them reflect on why they became a teacher, what motivated them, what is their underlying value system that motivated them to come into education, and then learn intention setting around that, thinking about themselves and how they want to be in this environment, and then giving themselves and others compassion in that environment to have the ups and downs that come with that, but also to keep on track with what their intention is, why they're there and why they want to be there.
So can you say a little bit about how long the program is, how it was delivered, what's involved for the teachers?
So there's several different models that we've been using to deliver care. The one that we delivered in the training, because we wanted to be able to demonstrate impacts, was pretty intensive. It involved 2 full days to begin with, back to back, where we began introducing these practices and this understanding. And then a couple of weeks later, we gave them 1 more day of training. And then a few weeks later, another whole day of training. And in between those programs, or workshops, we spent time with them, at least 1 phone call with them, coaching them through understanding what they'd learned and applying it to their experiences in the classroom, and also helping them build their own self-care practice. And we did all this from, I think, the very beginning of November until like the end of November, beginning of December, that period of time. And then we gave them a booster in February, another whole day. That was a review session. So the other way we've delivered it, so that was the model for the study. And one thing I forgot to mention is when we looked at these teachers again, we collected data from them, their self-report data, in the fall of the following year. We showed some of these effects continued. And actually, for example, we showed that physical symptoms, like the stress-related physical symptoms that we didn't see an impact on at the end of the school year, showed improvements in the fall. And mindfulness and emotion regulation continued to improve. As well as distress, reduced psychological distress. So that's encouraging because it means that it had longer term effects than just 1 school year. The other models we've offered it in is at Garrison Institute. It's presented as a retreat for a week every year, usually the last week of July, beginning of August. So you can go to the Garrison Institute website and find information there. And also we do it in several other ways, like 2 shorter weekend sessions or a longer 3-day session. So we try to take these hours and stretch them and spread them out in different ways. We haven't tested any of those models yet, so we're not exactly sure. We're just trying to make it feasible for the average school to be able to participate.
Before we go on to another research study, I'd like to pick up on that last point about feasibility. So as you know, I also offer mindfulness programs to teachers. And one of the things we're finding is that schools' plates are so full that schools don't have time to allocate. Teachers' plates are so full that teachers aren't disposed to do something after their working hours that they have to pay for themselves. And so it's actually quite difficult, we're finding, to engage teachers in these programs that we know will benefit them enormously. I mean, your research is pretty definitive. It has an impact on you, it has an impact on kids. It's what we all hoped would be true. But the research conditions are optimal, and the conditions in everyday life are suboptimal. Any thoughts about how to address that issue of implementation?
I mean, other than major policy changes? I mean, obviously, I think that our teachers are not getting enough paid time to continue their professional learning. And so that's a big policy related thing. In our study in New York, we did find it challenging to get this much time with these teachers. The way we worked it out, and you don't always have money to do this, obviously, is we partnered with the schools to share the cost of giving these teachers this time. So one of the days was a regular PD day that they have every year. The other was a day, so one of the days we paid for the teacher's time, for their sub, basically, because it was at work time. We paid them training wages for 1 weekend day, and the principal picked up the cost of 2 sub days. So we sort of spread the costs along, but that was a lot. I mean, we didn't actually originally have that in our budget, so we had to rearrange our budget to actually do that, and it was a big expense in this study. So you're right, it's difficult to find ways to do this. I guess other than making enough time and policy decisions that allow for this time, one program that I was involved in the development of and testing of is a program called CALM, which Create also delivers. And CALM is a place-based and yoga-based program for teachers that's 20 minutes long, and it's delivered in school before or after school. I think the one we tested, I know the one we tested was before school. And it integrates really simple yoga practices and postures that don't require wearing yoga clothes with some of the same kinds of practices that are in care, you know, learning mindful awareness practices, learning self-care skills, practicing compassion, etc. And we found really good impacts on a study that we conducted when I was at Penn State, showing not only improvements in the teacher's self-reported stress, but changes in their physiology. This was an exciting study because we collected cortisol and heart and blood pressure, and we found improvements in their psychophysiology as well. So that might be the best way to actually deliver these programs, but that's difficult too because that's more time. It's only 20 minutes a day, and it was 4 days a week, but it's more accessible. And oh, just to know, the average number of days the teachers attended was 2 days a week. We offered it 4 days a week, and they could choose whether to come or not. So
the research news is exciting, and the challenges on the ground are hard. So tell us about your next research project. You shared with me before we started this interview that you just received notification of some new funding. So tell us what you're going to be doing next.
Yeah, this is a really exciting project that I've been wanting to do for a long time. It builds off of this previous research. I had always hypothesized that when teachers have these skills that I'm describing, that they would be much better at teaching social emotional learning to kids. Because when you teach social emotional learning, obviously you need to embody what you're trying to teach, because you as the teacher are the curriculum, you know. So even though you're teaching a curriculum, if your behavior contradicts what you're teaching in the curriculum, it's not going to be very effective, in my opinion. So I had always thought, well, how might care improve the outcomes of a social emotional learning program? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the PATHS curriculum, which Mark Greenberg developed. It's a social emotional learning program that's been tested a lot. And it's being used a lot in the Chicago public schools, where we're going to do this study. And so we're going to recruit 40 schools, and half of them will just keep doing what they do, or if they don't already have PATHS, we will provide that for them. And then the other half will get PATHS plus care. So in that group, we'll be able to see whether or not the teachers deliver the PATHS program with more effectiveness, and as a result, do the children show improvements in their social and emotional skills too. So it's an exciting opportunity to look at, because if we see that a teacher can deliver these really effective programs even better, then that will help us understand why these kinds of programs are important for teachers to get.
So not to get too technical, but when you do these research projects, I'm assuming that the folks who are teaching care and the folks who are teaching, so let's stick with care, because I think that's where my point lies. So you have well-qualified people who are teaching this wonderful mindfulness-based curriculum to the teachers. Mm-hmm. And and then their skills improve, and then the impact on the students is strong. And the implication there that I think is important for our audience is the point you were just making, that teachers need to embody it, and they need to themselves have had the experience of good teaching, probably not just reading about it or watching an internet video or having an app on their phone to pick up their own mindfulness practice, but actually to have a skillful facilitator lead them through this learning. can you say more about that, or any research that's about that, or it's clearly your intuition?
Well, yeah, when it's interesting, this goes back a little bit to earlier in my career. I worked on a project called the Cultivating Emotional Balance Project, which was conducted at UC San Francisco back in the early 2000s, when I just was beginning my research career after I'd stopped being a teacher and teacher educator. I was during this transition. And the CEB, Cultivating Emotional Balance, is similar in some ways to CARE, because it combines emotion skills programs, or understanding knowledge and skills, with mindful awareness practices. And I got interested in this project because they decided to test it with teachers. So for me, it was like this perfect example of what I wanted to do. These practices were not specifically applied to the kinds of challenges that teachers experience in the classroom. It was just general stress reduction. And so one of my first studies, when I was still in San Francisco, we looked at whether or not the Cultivating Emotional Balance program would improve classroom interactions. Would the teachers show better emotional climate, better teacher sensitivity, these things that we found in the CARE program? Well, we didn't find those outcomes. So one of the advisors on that project was Paul Ekman, who's a pretty well-known emotion researcher, and he had been developing this emotion skills training part of the program. So I talked to him about it, and he said, well, I really think that these skills need to be contextualized, that just reducing stress is not necessarily going to show up in how a person deals with stress in the moment in a context that's stressful. So that's when I started working with my partners, Krista Turksma and Richard Brown from Naropa University. And we started thinking, well, how would we do that? I mean, because everybody's experience of this stressful context is really their own. There are some general things you can say about the classroom that are particularly stressful, but it's seen through the individual lens of that person. So we developed practices that allow a person to recall those situations and how they felt during those situations, and to really unpack what's going on when they get triggered in that context, in their specific context, with those particular students, right? So they can start learning their own habitual patterns of reactivity that come up for them. And we do see a lot of themes, a lot of similarities. But there are unique things that we also notice, because we all come from our own histories that have inculcated in us certain things that we can react to differently than other people. And an example of that is, for me and a lot of other people, Americans especially, time is an issue, and being late is an issue. And so for me, I notice not only do I feel uncomfortable when I'm late, but when somebody else is late, I immediately judge them. That's a habit of my mind, right? And if a student is late, I can immediately think this student is being disrespectful, the student doesn't care, blah, blah, blah. When that is probably not necessarily the case at all. It's just my own script about that behavior. So for me to go, when a student comes in late, to notice, myself getting tense, myself getting judgmental, then I can take some breaths, I can calm down, I can really see what's happening in this situation and be a lot more sensitive to the needs of the student rather than immediately reacting with judgment.
So I wonder, Tish, whether there are, what advice you would give to people in the audience who are like, well, I can't take care, and it's not in my neighborhood. I don't have all that time.
They should read Mindfulness for Teachers. I don't know if you can see it very well, but this is my book, Mindfulness for Teachers. And in this book, I go into a lot of depth about what I just described. So if anybody can't make it to a CARE training, but they want to learn what I'm talking about, this is a really great place to start.
And might there be a practice you could share with us in this
Sure.
moment that of any kind? That mostly we have educators and parents and adults watching. There are not too many, kids that are going to be following the Mindful Education Summit. But if you're here, we certainly welcome you. So if you could lead us in a practice, a short one, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So this practice I'm going to introduce has been shown time and time again to be incredibly effective. The studies we've done and the questions we've asked our teachers who have been in our studies, where we've asked them, what practice do you use, which is most effective, why is it effective, and etc. Something we call 3 breaths is the most commonly cited practice. And this is a simple practice, and you can do it anytime. You don't have to close your eyes. You don't have to sit in a quiet room or anything. You can do it at any point in time. If you do have the time to do it in quiet or on your own, you can also put your hands on your chest and your abdomen so that you feel your breath as you practice this. The practice is taking 3 slow, mindful breaths. And when I say mindful breaths, I mean really feeling the sensation of the air as it fills your body. So I can guide you through this practice if you would like. So to practice 3 breaths, you can put your hands on your chest, one hand on your chest, one hand on your abdomen, so you can really feel your torso as you breathe. You can close your eyes if you would like, or just lower your gaze so you can focus inward. And begin by taking 3 very slow, deep belly breaths at your own pace. Noticing the sensation of the air as it goes in your nostrils, fills your windpipe, feeling your lungs fill with air. And then letting the air out slowly, feeling your body release the air. Taking these 3 deep, slow breaths at your own pace, focusing your attention on the sensation of the air going in and out. And when the 3 breaths are finished, just allowing your breath to settle into its natural rhythm. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes or raise your gaze from being lowered. So this is the 3 breaths. When we do it with kids, which we also do, we call it calming. And we often combine calming with focusing, which involves listening to the sound of a chime. And what we're doing in some of our other work is encouraging teachers to start any lesson or start from a transition with the calming and the focusing. Kids don't have to close their eyes. They can keep their eyes open. But what you can do is say, when you don't hear the bell anymore, you can look at me. And that way you have calm, focused students to start your day or lesson, whatever, the beginning of a transition. And I really like what Tim Ryan has said over and over again, that we tell our kids, parents, teachers, everybody, calm down, pay attention, but we never teach them how. And when we teach children this, they are astounded because all of a sudden they know how to calm down and they can feel what calm feels like. So I encourage anybody who's working with kids at all to teach this practice, and adults. It works great for adults too.
So I don't know if this practice has been an explicit focus of your research, but I assume that other people have researched it. Can you share a little bit about that? This is in our research moment here.
Yeah, you know, I know there has been some research around the physiology of breathing, and that when, and you, if you did come to this uh, talk with some busyness in your body, your mind's thinking about a lot of things, you're anxious, you're running here, you're running there. If you do this, you can feel your autonomic nervous system just settle. And the tricky part, though, of this practice that we have found is knowing when to do it, or at least being aware that you need to do it. And so it is a way to actually literally calm your body down. The autonomic nervous system, it's like turning down the thermostat. You're calming your body down, which allows for you to think more clearly. Because when the stress response is triggered, a whole flood of neurotransmitters and hormones are amping you up to deal with whatever you imagine the threat is. And having a very effective thinking process is not usually prioritized. It's the fight or flight response. So that's why often we overreact to situations, because we're not thinking clearly. So just taking a moment, even to take one breath, can give you that moment to calm down before you automatically react to a situation.
So I think it's helpful to elaborate a little bit on that, having the practice enough in your repertoire that it actually is available to you, which is a suggestion that I make to people that I teach, that they practice regularly so that it's there for them when they need it. And then I think, having just reviewed some of your work, having the body awareness, that you recognize the early onset of the stress and the emotions. And it is a physiological process that's happening. And as we become more sensitive to our bodies, we actually can become aware of the earlier stages of that emotional ramping up. And the sooner we take those breaths, the better.
Some early signals that I notice about myself that seem to be common to other people is shoulder tension. Just there's this, if the fight, flight, or freeze response, if you're often in classrooms, we start feeling annoyed or irritated, which is teacher speak for angry, because we never use the word angry. And so the fight response involves this kind of fighting posture and a tension in the jaw, and also kind of a glaring expression. So when I start noticing like that is like a signal of like, oh, okay, I need to take a breath. I'm becoming annoyed.
I'm slightly miffed, and I'm going to. So one of the things that I notice as a principal and as a parent is when I took that posture, I was immediately accused of yelling, even though my tone of voice had never risen. So in a technical sense, I was not yelling. But the person on the other side definitely knew that there was yelling intention in the behavior.
One of the signals also for me was looking at students and wondering why they're looking frightened. Why are they so frightened? Oh, maybe I'm scary. Yeah.
So Tish, is there anything else you think on this day where we're focusing on calm and you're our resident expert researcher, anything else you would want to share with our viewers?
Yeah, another book that just recently came out that I wrote is The Trauma Sensitive Classroom. And the reason I wrote this book was that I see how easy it is in schools for situations to re-traumatize kids unintentionally. And I also saw how mindful awareness and compassion can support teachers' ability to provide an environment for trauma-exposed kids to heal and to be able to function well. And that I also saw teachers lowering expectations for students that they thought were trauma exposed, which I found problematic because that isn't helpful for students like that. Then, as I was writing the book, I also realized that trauma in our schools right now is ubiquitous. Everybody is experiencing trauma, from the teachers to the principals to the kids, various levels of it. The actual school environment itself can be traumatizing for various reasons. And so I wanted to find a way to support our educators in creating more trauma-sensitive classrooms by applying mindfulness and compassion.
I've been thinking about this same issue myself, and one of the directions my thought pattern is going is that it's not simply enough for individual teachers to put on their own oxygen masks first and use mindful awareness and these practices, that in the absence of a school culture that actually prioritizes self-care and this transformation to becoming a trauma-sensitive school, and supports the educators in their own resilience and resourcefulness, that trying to do it by yourself is really swimming uphill or up the river. That's a mixed metaphor there, but you're going against the tide in a very strong way. And what you need is a school leader to say, we need to collectively take care of ourselves so that we can collectively take better care of our students.
Yeah, and when a whole school community does that, it allows everybody in that environment to feel safer, to explore, to learn, to make mistakes, to get to know each other better and feel more connected to one another.
Thank you, Tish, for being with us today. It's been wonderful to chat with you and hear what you're learning and knowing and what's coming up. I'm looking forward in a few years to the results from the Chicago study.
Thank you, Rona. It's really been a pleasure.